So we hear from a lot of people that are dealing with these paresthesia type symptoms where they get the, oh man, I got this pins and needle kind of prickly thing going on, or they have a numbness, like why does my hand feel like it's not really there? Am I Marty McFly? Do I need to sing Johnny Be Good? What is happening? So in this video, I want to give you a different viewpoint of some of the things that a lot of people feel like may be creating these issues from person to person, along with some steps that you can take to try to figure out what may be causing it for you and steps you can take to turn it around. Here we go.
T.C. Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So just remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm not diagnosing you with anything. I'm not giving you any kind of medical advice here. I just want to share some information that I found when I was looking through studies and papers, and I'm going to put some links in the description below this video so you can dig into this. But I'm going to try to explain this in a way that a human could understand it. So I'm not a genius, and you should be able to follow along with what I say. But if you really want to dig into the science, I'll put the links in the description below so you can look into that further. And what I want to do is help you look at the information in those studies or papers differently than you may have looked at them before, and maybe see some information where it's like, oh wow, that makes sense. That would be weird, right? It would be weird for things to make sense. So when we start to research things like paresthesia, we see a lot of things where, oh, it's going to be like nerve irritation or nerve involvement. And a lot of times we're going to see things like pinched nerves, carpal tunnel, and sciatica. And those things have the ability to kind of pinch off the blood flow so that it can't get there, and so that the blood and oxygen can't get to those nerves and they can't function correctly when that's not happening. So that can be important, and we all understand that. We sit weird in a chair and we're sitting on our foot, and then all of a sudden it falls asleep because that blood flow was not getting there and oxygen was not getting where it needed to be for everything to function correctly. So that can be important. We'll remember that. But a lot of times when we're looking at these things, like if you talk to a chiropractor, they're pretty much always going to think, well, this is what it is, because that's kind of the information that they work with. Because they can do a lot of manipulations that can bring relief when this is the problem, but sometimes it can bring relief even when some of these other things that we're talking about are actually creating the problem, but those manipulations can still bring some relief. So they kind of feel like, oh, this is what's causing it, we just need to keep doing this. But sometimes there's more than one thing involved that can be creating a problem. So we want to look at the other things, and we see things like hyperventilation, MS, some treatments like chemo, and some medications and even some antibiotics have the ability to create this symptom. Toxic substances like lead or radiation, nerve damage like could happen like maybe from an injury or some type of illness, excessive alcohol use, diabetes, poor glucose control, poor diet, and B12 deficiencies. So we see a wide variety of issues that can create this problem. But let's jump into these first. This alcohol use, diabetes, poor blood glucose, poor diet, all of these things have the ability to create trouble with blood sugar levels. And we know that high blood sugar levels can create inflammation that can create discomfort in a wide variety of ways. High insulin also is very inflammatory. So this makes sense when we're seeing things like diabetic neuropathy. And neuropathy is kind of this blanket term for just anything that can cause nerve trouble. Any kind of disease or issue that can create trouble with the nerves can be categorized as neuropathy. And paresthesia can just be a symptom of neuropathy, but paresthesia can also be caused by a wide variety of other issues. So this topic can really get confusing. We haven't even gotten going and we're already a little bit confused. But when we're looking at this diabetic issue, and I'm not saying you're diabetic, I don't need to put up a disclaimer that says you're not diabetic, do I? But when we're looking at this, it appears that like 50% of diabetics have some type of nerve damage. So that really screams, well, this high sugar issue really can be creating a lot of trouble, but maybe we need to look, is there something else going on as well? And what we want to look at is this hypocapnia. And there's a lot of links below that I put that you're going to see a lot of information when people are talking about. Hypocapnia is when the CO2 in the system goes way too low. And CO2 is carbon dioxide. That's what we exhale when we breathe out. But it has a lot of other purposes in the body as well. So to understand this hypocapnia and why this can be a problem with these blood sugar handling type issues, we need to understand the Bohr effect. And we learned about the Bohr effect in the 8th grade, and then we just kind of never talked about it again. But when we're looking at the Bohr effect, we have to understand that the blood has a pH value that it has to stay within. And it's a pretty narrow range. And when it goes outside of that range, we just kind of die. So the body has a lot of backup systems to kind of move things around so that that blood pH stays in the right range. And the Bohr effect helps us understand that when the blood leans too far on that alkaline side, oxygen can't get down to the tissues where it needs to be. It sort of traps that oxygen in there. So the doctor will be like, oh, let's look at your pulse oximeter and your oxygen is great, but it's not showing you that the oxygen is in the blood. It looks like it's great, but it's not getting down to the tissues where it needs to be. So why this is important is because CO2 is acidic. So one of the main methods that the body uses to regulate that pH of the blood is our breath rate, the rate at which we breathe. So if the blood is leaning too far on that alkaline side, the body will slow the rate at which we breathe in an effort to hold on to more of that CO2 to help acidify that blood so that it can be balanced out and then oxygen can get down to the tissues where it needs to be. And you'll see some links below that explain why this alkalosis can create trouble for these nerves. And there's even a study that they did where they're looking at this hyperventilation thing, where they had the people in the study breathe really, really fast to kind of hyperventilate themselves. And it would create these paresthesia symptoms just by doing that. And when you're breathing really fast, you're huffing off a lot more of that CO2. So when you're expelling a lot more of that CO2, now the CO2 is not there to help balance out the pH of the blood, and the blood will lean more on that alkaline side, and that alkalinity in the blood creates a problem where the oxygen can't get down to the tissues, and then we're creating these symptoms. So if you sit on your foot and you're restricting oxygen from getting there, it makes sense to us. But it doesn't make sense to us that if the blood is leaning too alkaline and oxygen can't get down to the tissues, couldn't that create the same symptom? This hyperventilation study showed that it did. Now when we're looking at this people with blood sugar handling issues, well, CO2 is a byproduct of processing carbohydrates and sugars. So we process glucose and then it have this byproduct of creating more CO2. So what we know is that those people that are diabetic or maybe just insulin resistant, they have trouble processing that glucose. So if they're not processing glucose as effectively, then they're not going to create as much CO2. So we see all of our diabetics just about, they all have a low breath rate. So what you can do is you can just set a kitchen timer for like a minute and then just count the number of inhales that you take in a minute. Don't count the inhales as 1 and the exhales as 2. Just count the inhales. And that breath rate should be around 14 to 19. That's really what we're looking at. But if it's lower than that, that's a sign that the blood is leaning more on that alkaline side. And we're seeing that when it leans on that alkaline side, because of the Bohr effect, tells us that the oxygen can't get down to the tissue level. So with most of our diabetic clients or people that are really leaning insulin resistant, we often see a lower breath rate because they're not creating as much CO2 to help balance out the pH of that blood. And with these sugar handling issues, we also see issues with calcium and vitamin D, and there were some papers below that talked about how the tissues can be kind of uncomfortable when the calcium is in the wrong place. And when sugar is high, it tends to have the ability to pull a lot of calcium out of the tissues where that calcium is supposed to be. It's supposed to be in those tissues, but the high sugar can pull the calcium out because calcium likes to follow sugar, just like you would follow an ice cream truck when you were 8 years old. So if somebody's blood sugar is really high, it can pull too much calcium out of the tissues that can create some irritations in those tissue levels. And that calcium going into the bloodstream also has the ability to alkalize that blood even more and restrict oxygen utilization even more. And when calcium goes high in the blood, the body has this trick where it kind of reduces the vitamin D that it's going to create, because vitamin D also has the ability to pull calcium out of the tissues. So they look at type 2 diabetics and like, oh man, your vitamin D's low. You got to crank up your vitamin D level because we see low vitamin D with all of our type 2 diabetics. You don't want to be like them, so you got to crank your vitamin D up. And the body was just trying to fix a problem. When you pull too much calcium out of the tissues, it can create a lot of trouble. So the body was reducing vitamin D, but of course we don't listen to Mother Nature, we just cram more in there. So if you want to learn more about that, we'll put a link in the description below for our video on why was my vitamin D test low. But you can see that all these problems can really magnify this alkalosis issue, and the alkalosis issue in the blood can really create these oxygen utilization issues. So this would make sense that if oxygen can't get down to the tissues and help those nerves work the way that they're supposed to, that the signals could get fired the wrong way, or it could create other types of troubles that result in these discomforts. You sat on your foot and it reduced that circulation of oxygen. That makes sense. So any other reduction of circulation of oxygen should make sense for creating these symptoms as well. So are the symptoms coming from just the high blood sugar creating inflammation, high insulin creating inflammation, or is it more about this oxygen utilization problem? I don't know. Maybe some people both issues are going on. We don't really know. But what can be important is, do I have these issues and am I having these symptoms? Then if that's the case, then would improving these situations improve the symptoms? It'd be worth hearing about it if that happens to you. So we'll put the link in the description below for our video on how to improve insulin resistance. So if this is a problem for you, you can dig into that and see if that creates any improvements. But we also have to look at other possible issues, and we hear a lot about this myelin sheath when we're talking about nerve trouble and these pain issues and discomforts and pins and needles and all that. And the myelin sheath is just this kind of coating that goes around where these nerves send the signals through. It's like a coating. It's just like the coating that would go on a plug to your toaster. Like if you didn't have that coating there and you just went and plugged your toaster in, well, you're going to be the toast. So the coating is important. So this myelin sheath that coats this can be very important to keep those discomforts from happening. But it appears that a lot of people have this issue where there's dysmyelination is what they call it, where this myelin sheath doesn't seem to rebuild or repair or regrow the way that it's supposed to, and it just kind of falls apart, and then it's really not there covering everything up to create that protection anymore. So the myelin is actually made up of protein and fatty substances. So what we want to look at is, why wouldn't that be rebuilt? Some people feel like, oh, it's just an autoimmune issue, the body's attacking itself, or oh, this person just has a malfunction. But why don't we also have the ability to just look at the basics of like human function when we're looking at things like this? It seems like we kind of skip over that sometimes. And one thing we have to understand is that the body has rhythms at the cellular level when it comes to rebuilding the body. During the day, we should be in what's called a catabolic state, where the body is very good at creating energy and kind of keeping us going all day. And in that state is where the body breaks down tissues so that they can be rebuilt and renewed. And then at night, we move into this anabolic state where the body is very good at sleeping and resting, but also rebuilding and repairing. But the problem is, for a wide variety of reasons, some people can get stuck in one of these states and they're not moving back and forth from day to night like they should. So for example, if someone's really stuck in this catabolic state and they're not moving into this rebuild and repair state at night, then how are they going to rebuild these tissues that have been broken down? They're stuck in the breakdown mode all the time. They're just breaking down and they're not moving into the rebuilding and repairing. So this is one scenario that could create problems for these myelin sheath type issues. And incidentally, in this catabolic state where the cells are kind of more permeable all the time, it can change the makeup of that chemical makeup in the tissues and those tissue fluids, which can create some irritation in those tissue fluids. So that could be something else going on that has the possibility of creating pins and needles or numb-like feelings. And if you want to understand those anabolic and catabolic issues, we'll put a link in the description below for how to know if your circadian rhythm is off, and you can dig deeper into that. But another thing we need to look at when we're going to rebuild these myelin sheaths is that we need materials to do that. Why wouldn't we need that? Remember, these are made up of proteins and fatty substances. So that makes sense that the body would need the building blocks for proteins and fatty substances to be able to rebuild those. If you were having a house built and you went to the construction site and they didn't have any bricks or wood or nails or hammers or anything like that, you wouldn't just say, well, you guys are lazy. They don't have anything to build the house with. Your housewarming party is going to be a bunch of people standing in the yard playing cornhole. There's not going to be a house to look at. So we need materials to build with. So when we're looking at why wouldn't a person have those building materials, we need to understand the digestive process. And when we eat food, this stomach is supposed to make hydrochloric acid, or HCl, that helps us acidify that food so that we can break that food down. And then when the acidified food leaves the stomach and comes down here into the duodenum, that's when this gallbladder squirts alkaline bile down to help neutralize those acids and really help us bust the food apart and get all the nutrients out of that food. That's why we eat food, to get the nutrients out of that food. And that bile also helps us emulsify our dietary fats so they can be broken down and used by the body. Undigested fats just become a problem that the body's like, I don't know what to do with this. This isn't broken down. I can't use this. So we need both of those functions. And the problem is it's very common for someone not to be making enough stomach acid. It's very common for people to be taking things to turn off stomach acid. It's also very common for someone's bile to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. So if either of those sides of digestion are not working correctly, you might not be able to get all of the nutrients out of the food that you're eating. So if you're having any digestive symptoms like burping or bloating or constipation or diarrhea or acid reflux or nausea or even just indigestion, like food just kind of sits there like a rock in your stomach for 6 hours, or maybe you have skin or acne issues, like all of these are signs that digestion is not working the way that it's supposed to work. So if you're not breaking down your food, where are you getting your nutrients from? Well, I can tell you that a lot of times when the body is not getting what it needs, it'll break down its own tissues and turn those into the amino acid building blocks that it needs to rebuild protein type structures. But if you're not making enough stomach acid, how are you going to break those proteins down into the amino acids that the body uses to rebuild protein structures? Your body doesn't take chicken and use that to rebuild muscle. It's got to be broken down into building blocks that it can use to rebuild muscles and tissues and myelin sheaths and things like that. If bile isn't flowing correctly, you're not going to be able to break the fats down so you can use those in that structure of the myelin sheath. You really got to have both sides working. So this can become a factor when somebody has a body part that's not being rebuilt correctly. Maybe they don't have the building blocks to do that. Maybe they don't have the ability to get the body into the state where it does rebuild. These things have to be looked at. How come we're not doing studies on these things to figure out, does a person even have the building blocks to rebuild stuff? Maybe you could do a study and let me know how it goes. That'd be awesome. This also brings us back to a lot of people feel like these B12 deficiencies are problematic because B12 is needed to rebuild those myelin sheaths. And we know that B12 comes from breaking down proteins. So if you're not eating protein, maybe a vegan's not getting enough B12 because they're not eating it, but a person could be eating plenty of animal protein, but if they can't break it down, they're not going to get the B12 out of it either. So when we look at things like deficiencies and a poor diet, maybe the diet isn't so bad. Maybe the person just can't digest the food to get the nutrients out of it, so it's like they're eating a poor diet. There's a lot of variations that can happen to create these options of things that can create this trouble. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can see that you might be having some of these issues and some of these issues, and multiple things can be creating the problem at once or from time to time. Maybe one day this is creating trouble, another month this is what's creating the problem. Why won't this go away? Well, maybe there's more than one thing going on. So if you want to figure out what steps might be right for you, my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, will walk you through a lot of these processes. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'm going to put a link in the description below that you can get the whole thing totally for free. And you can jump to chapters 3 and 4, and that kind of helps you figure out, are there aspects of digestion that are not working correctly? And if so, what steps can I take to improve those? As well as steps that you can take to figure out, do I even have the ability to move into that rebuild state? Is that a problem? Am I maybe leaning too far on that insulin resistance side? You really want to get an idea of how your body is operating instead of just trying to do some remedy that's going to fix a symptom. How is a remedy going to fix it when you can see that there's such a variety of things that can create this problem in the first place? So you might have some homework, and that's okay. When you find answers, it's worth doing some homework. So those links will be in the description below for you to dig into. And right now, if you want to get an idea of how your digestion might be working, jump over and check out our video on 20 signs you're not digesting your food correctly. And that might give you insights in, do you even have the building blocks to rebuild stuff? I can't wait to hear about your results.